Hey everyone, it's Dr. NightStare. Glad you're here. Before we get into it, hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Quick question before we start. Where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Alright, let's get settled. Get comfortable, let your body relax, and just take it easy. I sat in the living room, a thick blanket pulled around my shoulders. The old house groaned against the blizzard's force. Wind howled outside, a constant sound. Snow hammered the windows, piling high against the glass. The power had been out for hours. I knew I was alone in the house. My brother usually worked late on Tuesdays, but tonight the roads were impassable. I had ordered a pizza earlier from a shop called Al's Pizza. I had never ordered from them before. My phone battery was low, so I had called from the landline. The old phone felt cold in my hand. The only light came from a battery-powered lantern on the coffee table. Its soft glow cast long, shifting shadows across the walls, making the familiar room seem different. The cold seeped into the house, a creeping chill that settled deep in my bones despite the blanket. I shivered, pulling the wool tighter. The stove had gone cold. The pipes probably were freezing. A gust of wind hit the house, rattling a window pane somewhere upstairs. The sound was sharp. A drip of water landed on the kitchen floor. The roof must be leaking again. My stomach grumbled. I wondered how long it would take for Al's Pizza to arrive. The man on the phone had sounded distracted when I placed the order. He had mumbled something about the storm. I hoped they would still deliver. The thought of hot food was a comforting idea, but the longer I waited, the less comforting it became. The darkness outside felt absolute. No streetlights cut through the snow. No car headlights passed. The world felt empty beyond these walls, swallowed by the storm's endless white fury. Then I heard it. A scraping sound came from the attic above. I froze, listening intently. It was a soft, dragging noise, then a pause, then it resumed. It was not the wind. I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses make noises, and this sound felt wrong, too deliberate. I looked around the room, seeing only the shifting shadows. The scraping stopped. I waited, holding my breath. The air grew still. The house felt suddenly larger, emptier. The isolation grew heavier. I got up from the couch. My feet were cold on the floorboards. I walked toward the front window, peering through a small, cleared patch of glass. The blizzard raged, a swirling white chaos. Nothing moved outside. Then the wind briefly died down. The air felt too still. The wind picked up again. I thought I saw a shape at the edge of the property, partially obscured by the falling snow. It was a tall, dark form standing near the old oak tree. It was perfectly still. I stared hard. The snow swirled around it, making it difficult to see clearly. Then it was gone. The cold pressed in from the glass. The doorbell rang. The sound cut through the quiet house, startling me. I had forgotten the pizza. I walked toward the front door, my heart pounding. I gripped the cold doorknob and pulled it open, just a crack. A man stood on the porch. He was tall and thin. Snow swirled around him, but did not cling to his dark coat. His face was pale. His eyes were wide and unblinking, black in the lantern light. His mouth was a tight line. He held a flat pizza box. Steam rose from the box. He did not shiver in the biting wind. "Pizza," the man said. His voice was flat and dry, a rustling sound. It held no warmth. He did not look at me, his gaze fixed over my shoulder into the house. I reached for my wallet. My hand trembled. "How much?" I asked. He did not answer. He held the box out. His arm was long and stiff. His fingers were long, curled around the cardboard. I took the box. It was warm. "Thank you," I said. He did not move. He stood there, staring. The wind whipped snow around him, but his clothes remained dry. There was no snow on his dark hair. The blizzard did not affect him. I waited for him to speak or leave. He did neither. The moment stretched, uncomfortable and wrong. His wide black eyes held me. Then he tilted his head. It was a jerky movement. A tiny smile pulled at one corner of his mouth, then vanished. His eyes did not change. He took one step back, then another. He still watched me. He moved without sound. His boots made no crunch on the snow. I pulled the door shut quickly. The click of the lock echoed. I leaned against the wood, breathing hard. My heart hammered against my ribs. The man had been wrong. His eyes had bothered me most, holding no expression, only a vacant darkness. I turned from the door. I walked toward the kitchen and placed the pizza on the counter. The house felt colder. The lantern light seemed weaker. I went back to the door. I listened. Nothing. The storm raged outside. The delivery man was gone. There were no footprints in the fresh snow on the porch. The porch was empty. The snow was smooth. He had disappeared. A sudden, sharp knock came from the front door. I jumped. My body went cold. The knock was firm and insistent. It was clearly audible over the wind. I did not move. I stood in the kitchen, frozen. My eyes were fixed on the door. It came again. Knock. 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 Knock, knock. The knock was too deliberate. No person could have disappeared and left no tracks, then knocked again. I backed away from the kitchen. I moved slowly and silently toward the living room. The lantern light swayed, making shadows dance wildly. I gripped the back of the couch. I strained my ears. The blizzard roared outside, but I heard something else. A scuttling sound came from upstairs. It was quick, light, a rapid scratching. It moved across the ceiling above me. The sound was too big for a mouse. It sounded like many small, hard feet moving fast. Then it stopped. The house was quiet inside, except for the blizzard. Then the sound started again. It was closer, above the kitchen. It was louder. It scurried with speed. It was coming down the stairs. I heard a distinct thump as something hit a wooden step. My breath hitched in my throat. I looked at the dark hallway leading to the stairs. The shadows there thickened and shifted. The skittering stopped at the bottom of the stairs. The pizza box was still on the kitchen counter. I could not see it. I heard a soft, wet drag sound from the kitchen. It was a slithering noise, almost a whisper. It moved around the kitchen. I heard a distinct scraping. A chair creaked slightly. Something was in there. It moved the chair. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling a gasp. My body trembled. The kitchen sounds continued. They were small movements, constant and many. They moved closer to the archway, to the living room. A fleeting form with many limbs moved at the edge of my vision. It ducked back into the darkness. I squeezed my eyes shut. This was not real. This could not be real. The air in the house grew colder. A new smell filled the room. It was sweet. It held the scent of decaying flowers. Something sharp and metallic mixed in. It came from the kitchen. I opened my eyes. I looked at the archway. The sounds had stopped. The kitchen was utterly still, but I felt a presence. It was watching me. I felt eyes on me from the darkness. The doorbell rang again. The sound was sharp. It made my eyes snapped to the front door. I did not want to move. I did not want to see who stood there, but the thought of leaving the door unanswered felt worse. I moved slowly from the living room. My steps were quiet on the floorboards. The air felt heavy around me. I reached the front door. My hand paused on the knob. I took a deep breath. I opened it, a narrow crack. The delivery man stood there. He had not left. His face was paler now. His eyes were wider, two black pools that reflected no light. A thin gray sheen covered his skin. His dark coat was dry. No snow touched his hair. He stood perfectly still, unaffected by the raging wind and snow. "I need to come inside," he said. His voice was a dry whisper. It seemed to come from far away. "The storm is getting worse." I stared at him. The thought of letting him in filled me with dread. "You need to leave," I said. My voice was a shaky sound. "I am sorry, but you need to go." He took a step forward. His foot lifted, then landed without a sound on the porch. The storm howled around him. He did not shiver. He did not blink. "The roads are closed," he said. His head tilted again, a slow, unnatural angle. "My vehicle is stuck. I need shelter." I looked past him. The blizzard was a solid white wall. No car was visible. There were no tracks on the porch. The snow was smooth. The idea of him driving here stuck seemed impossible. He had appeared from nowhere. "There is no car," I said. My voice grew stronger. "There are no tracks." He pushed gently on the door. It moved inward a few inches. His strength was shocking. I braced myself against it, pushing back. His gaze was fixed on my face. A faint, sweet smell, like decaying flowers, came from him. It mixed with the sharp, metallic scent I had noticed earlier. Then, a new sound came from inside the house. It was a wet, heavy thud. It echoed from the basement. My head snapped toward the sound. The basement door, usually kept closed, was now slightly ajar. A sliver of darkness showed. The delivery man pushed harder on the front door. "I need to come in," he repeated. His voice was no longer a whisper. It was a flat, insistent drone. I glanced at him. His black eyes were not looking at me. They were fixed on the basement door. A sudden, terrible realization washed over me. The thing at the door was not alone. It was not the only thing in the house. I looked through the crack in the basement door. A dim light came from the bottom of the stairs. It was the emergency light usually kept for outages. The light illuminated something on the cold concrete floor. It was a human form. It was twisted. It was broken. Limbs bent at impossible angles. The body was unnaturally long. It was contorted into a gruesome knot. Dark, wet stains covered its clothes. Its face was turned away. A pale, long hand reached out, its fingers unnaturally extended. It was the delivery man. The real one. His skin was the color of spoiled milk. A deep, wet gash opened on his neck. My breath caught in my throat. My mind reeled. The thing at the front door was not him. It was something else. The skittering, the lurking presence, the second knock, all of it crashed into my understanding. I let go of the front door. The delivery man stumbled forward one step. I turned and ran. I did not think. I did not look back. My feet pounded on the floorboards. I ran past the dining room, past the cold stove. I slammed through the kitchen door. The back door lock was stiff. My fingers fumbled with it. I heard a scraping sound from the hallway. It was fast. It was coming closer. The lock clicked open. I yanked the door open. The blizzard hit me. It was a physical blow. The wind tore at my hair. Snow blinded me. The cold was a searing pain on my skin. I did not care. I plunged into the whiteout. I heard a wet, slithering sound from behind me, from the open back door. I kept running. My lungs burned. My legs moved through the deep snow. The white world swallowed me whole. I woke slowly, my head throbbing with a dull ache. A bright, artificial light shone above, blinding me. My body felt stiff and heavy, and my fingers were painfully cold, swathed in thick white bandages. I recognized the sterile smell of a hospital. A nurse moved quietly around the room. and I knew I was no longer in the house. A doctor explained. I suffered from severe frostbite and a concussion after being found collapsed in the deep snow. Later, a police officer came to my bedside, a notebook in his hand. He spoke calmly about the incident. He mentioned Al's Pizza, and his voice softened as he explained the shop had closed down decades ago. A delivery driver from Al's had vanished during an historic blizzard, a storm much like the one I had just endured, and his disappearance was never solved. The officer concluded by stating that no pizza order had been placed to my address that night. My brother arrived soon after, his face etched with worry, and he gripped my bandaged hand. I asked him if he had ordered any pizza. He shook his head, looking confused, confirming he had been at work and had not placed any order. He suggested the extreme cold and my head injury must have caused me to imagine things. He looked at my hands and then at my face with concern. I tried to explain the man at the door, the twisted body in the basement, and the sounds in the kitchen. He listened without interruption, attributing everything to the concussion and hypothermia, insisting it was a nightmare. But the black, unblinking eyes of the delivery man remained vivid in my memory, as did the impossible length of the contorted body. The metallic, sweet smell of decaying flowers still seemed to cling to the air around me. The reality they presented did not match the undeniable terror I had experienced, leaving me haunted by a truth no one else would ever believe. The blizzard had raged for hours, growing worse with each minute. Every gust of wind slammed against the house, rattling the window panes. The power had gone out a long time ago, plunging everything into a deep, cold darkness. I huddled under a thick blanket on the couch, the only light coming from the flickering flame of a single candle. My phone battery had died ages ago, cutting off any connection to the outside world. I was completely alone in the house, Mark having left earlier that morning before the storm turned truly hostile, promising to be back by evening. Evening had long since passed. The house grew colder, the warmth leaching out from the walls. I kept listening to the relentless roar of the wind, punctuated by the occasional crack of ice-laden branches snapping outside. A sudden sharp knock startled me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Nobody would be out in this weather. The sound came again, more insistent this time, from the front door. I rose slowly, pushing the blanket away. My heart pounded in my chest. I picked up the heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace, holding it tight as I crept through the dim living room and down the short hallway. The front door stood thick, a dark slab against the furious white outside. I pressed my ear to the wood, hearing nothing but the gale. Then another knock, softer this time but still distinct above the storm. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding weak in the vast, cold space. "Pizza delivery?" A muffled voice responded. "Pizza?" That made no sense. I had not ordered anything. Mark was not here, and he would not order pizza for me and then leave me to deal with it in a blackout. My hand shook on the doorknob. I peered through the small peephole, seeing only a distorted swirl of white snow. I hesitated a moment more. "Who is it for?" I asked, my voice a bit steadier now. "For Mark," the voice said, clearer this time. It was a man's voice, gravelly and deep. I slowly unlatched the deadbolt, then the chain lock. Cold air immediately rushed into the hallway. I opened the door a crack. I could just make out a man through the swirling snow on my porch. He wore a thin, soaped uniform with a cap pulled low over his eyes. Snowflakes clung to his eyelashes and beard. He held a pizza box, its cardboard edges already damp. The uniform had a logo on the breast pocket, Al's Pizza. I had never heard of the place. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely a whisper against the wind. "My brother isn't here. I didn't order any pizza." The man stared at me, his eyes dark pits under the cap. He did not speak. The wind whipped past, stinging my face. He just kept holding the box out, a still figure against the storm. "He prepaid," the man said, his voice flat, "and he requested a specific delivery." "A specific delivery?" I repeated, confused. "He said to deliver it after the power went out, no matter the storm," the man stated. His words felt stiff, like a recitation. He continued to hold out the pizza box, not moving. The cold bit into my skin. The situation felt wrong. "I really cannot take it," I said, trying to close the door. The man stepped forward, pushing the box into the opening. He did not use much force, but his movement was firm. He did not attempt to enter. He just held the pizza box in the doorway, blocking its closure. A strange smell, metallic and earthy, mixed with an unidentifiable scent, drifted in with the cold air. I looked at his hands, seeing they were bare and red from the cold. He showed no sign of shivering. This delivery man stood like a statue, waiting. I glanced past him into the white void of the blizzard. There was no car visible, no indication of how he had reached the house. The icy blast was relentless, biting into my exposed skin. I shivered deeply, finally reaching out and taking the cold cardboard box from his outstretched hands. His grip felt strangely dry, almost rough, despite the clinging snow and the wet uniform sleeves. He released the box and then turned without a single word, melting into the furious white torrent of the blizzard. I watched the spot where he had stood for a long moment, but the wind immediately erased any trace of him. The snow whirled, a living, breathing wall. I closed the door, fumbling with the deadbolt and chain lock until they clicked into place. The heavy silence of the house returned, deeper and more oppressive now that the direct assault of the wind was gone. I placed the pizza box on the small table in the hallway, not daring to look at it closely. My heart still hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum in the cold, dim space. I walked slowly back to the living room, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The air in the house seemed thick and waiting. A soft scratching sound began then, coming from somewhere above me. It was not the familiar moan of the wind or the creak of old wood settling. It sounded like something dragging claws across a wooden surface, moving slowly in the attic space directly above the living room. I listened closely, holding my breath, straining my ears in the overwhelming quiet. The noise paused, then started again, a series of light, quick scrapes that made the hairs on my arms stand up sharply. It shifted, seeming to drop lower, the sounds now coming from within the walls themselves. I heard a faint rustling, then a distinct, delicate skittering right behind the plaster, just beside where I stood. I pressed my back against the cold wall, trying to determine the source, trying to rationalize it. A mouse? A squirrel? The sounds were too deliberate, too large for a mouse, and wrong for a squirrel. They continued for what felt like an eternity, sometimes quiet, sometimes a little louder, always moving through the unseen spaces of the house. They seemed to trace a path, moving through the ceiling joists, down into the wall studs, and then along the floorboards, a hidden presence exploring my home. Then, as suddenly as they had begun, the sounds stopped completely. The house became utterly still, more silent than before, a suffocating vacuum of sound. I sat there in the dark, clutching the iron poker, my body tense and cold. The quiet was worse than the scratching. I stared into the black shadows of the living room, imagining things moving just out of sight. A new sound pierced the suffocating quiet. A sharp, insistent knock came from the front door, just as it had before. My blood ran cold, a wave of pure dread washing over me. It could not be him again. He was gone, absorbed by the storm. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff, gripping the poker tight. I moved through the dim hallway, each step a battle against my own terrified hesitation. I peered through the small peephole. The man stood there, the pizza delivery man. He was covered in a fresh layer of snow, his thin uniform now completely white, a ghostly figure against the raging blizzard. I opened the door only a crack, the freezing wind immediately slicing through the narrow gap. "You are still here?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper against the gale. He looked utterly frozen, his face pale and almost blue beneath the cap. His eyes seemed deeper set, darker. "My vehicle is gone," he said, his voice now a strained, rough rasp, barely audible over the wind's shriek. "The storm took it. I have no way to leave." I glanced past him, trying to see anything through the blinding snow. There was no car visible, no indication of a path, nothing but unbroken white swirling chaos. A powerful dread tightened in my stomach, a cold knot of foreboding. He was a stranger, an unsettling presence, but the storm was truly terrible. I could not leave a person out there to freeze to death. "Come inside," I heard myself say, the words feeling alien, coated in an immense reluctance. "Just for a little while." He stepped inside immediately, a gust of icy wind following him into the hallway. I closed the door quickly, securing the locks once more. As he moved past me, shaking some snow from his cap, I quickly glanced down at the snow on the porch. The fresh, thick layer was pristine, unbroken. There were no footprints leading to or from the door, just the smooth, undisturbed blanket of white. I watched him walk into the living room, a chill that had nothing to do with the cold settling deep in my bones. I let him into the house. He walked into the living room, a slow, stiff movement, and I turned back to finish securing the front door. The locks clicked into place. I turned around then, expecting to see him standing there, but the living room was empty. The dim light from my single candle did not reach far into the corners, but the space where he should have been was vacant. My breath caught. I called out his name. "Hello?" But only the echoing quiet answered. The cold air he brought in lingered, a bitter reminder of his presence. A dark trail of melted snow stretched across the worn floorboards of the hallway. It led from the spot where he had first stepped inside, past the living room entrance, and continued towards the back of the house. I followed the damp marks with my eyes, a growing sense of dread tightening in my chest. The trail turned, disappearing down the narrow steps leading to the basement. My heart hammered, a rapid beat against my ribs. I picked up the iron poker from its spot by the fireplace, its cold weight grounding me slightly. I held it tight in my hand. I crept towards the basement door, my bare feet cold on the wood floor. The door stood ajar, a sliver of deeper blackness showing through the gap. I pushed it open slowly, revealing the steep, unlit steps. The smell of damp earth and stale air drifted up from below. The melted snow trail was clear on the steps, leading downward into the gloom. I took a deep, shuddering breath and descended, one hesitant step after another. The poker held out in front of me. The darkness swallowed me whole. At the bottom of the stairs, the basement was vast and cold. The single candle I carried cast dancing shadows that distorted familiar shapes. I moved the light across the room. The snow trail ended directly below a section of the ceiling. I looked up, following the wet marks, and then I saw it. Something was lodged in the ceiling vent. A leg, impossibly bent, protruded from the narrow grate. Its skin was pale, waxy, not like human skin. A knee joint was twisted at an extreme, unnatural angle. I raised the candle higher. Another limb, an arm, was jammed into a different part of the vent, fingers splayed and rigid. Then I saw a head, tilted back, its neck craned. It was the delivery man's face, or what had been his face. His eyes were wide open, dark and unblinking, fixed on nothing. His mouth was stretched into a silent, gaping O. The skin around his mouth pulled taut, revealing sharpened teeth that gleamed in the dim light. His entire body was folded and jammed into the impossibly small ventilation shaft, his bones clearly dislocated, his limbs twisted into grotesque shapes that no living person could achieve. It was not a man. It was something else, something that had worn a man's shape. A primal scream tore from my throat, raw and desperate. I dropped the candle. The basement plunged into total darkness. Terror surged through me, an overwhelming, freezing wave. I stumbled back, scrambling up the basement stairs, my hands scraping against the rough wood. I burst through the basement door and sprinted down the hallway, not looking back. I fumbled with the front door locks, my fingers clumsy with pure panic. The blizzard still raged outside, a furious white wall. I yanked the door open and hurled myself into the storm, not caring about the brutal cold. The wind immediately tore at me, snatching my breath. Snow lashed my face, stinging my exposed skin. I ran blindly, bare feet sinking into the deep drifts, the freezing cold a sharp agony. My thin clothes offered no protection. The house vanished behind me, swallowed by the swirling white chaos. My lungs burned. My legs moved slower, heavy and numb. The cold seeped into my bones, a chilling embrace. I stumbled, falling face first into a deep snowdrift. The world tilted and spun. The roaring wind faded, replaced by a distant ringing in my ears. Darkness pressed in from all sides, a vast, cold blanket. The last thing I felt was the biting ice on my skin before consciousness slipped away entirely. My eyes opened to a white ceiling. The air smelled of antiseptic. A harsh light pressed down on me, disorienting my vision. I lay in a hospital bed, a sheet pulled up to my chest. My body ached with a persistent throb. A police officer sat beside the bed, a notepad resting on his knee. He looked at me, his expression serious. "You are awake," he said. His voice was quiet. "You were found miles from your home, unconscious in the snow. Hypothermia almost claimed you." I tried to speak. My throat felt raw. A nurse appeared then, holding a glass of water. I drank the liquid slowly, savoring its relief. "The pizza," I whispered. My voice was hoarse. "The man." The officer nodded. "We have been trying to understand your story. There is no Al's Pizza in operation now. That business closed over 40 years ago. Its owner, a man named Al Miller, disappeared during a severe blizzard, never found." Dread seeped into my rewarming body. The officer then spoke of Mark. My brother walked into the room, his face pale. I tried to smile. "Mark," I croaked. "The pizza delivery. Why did you send him?" He shook his head. His eyes were wide. "I never ordered any pizza," Mark said. His voice was firm. "I would not have left you alone with a delivery in that weather. I certainly would not have ordered from some strange place during a blackout." His words resonated through the room, confirming the impossible. The blizzard, the impossible man, the strange pizza. It all became a horrifying reality. Something without explanation, an ordeal imprinted on my mind. For 7 nights, the sharp rap on my door dragged me awake. It always happened at exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, a precise pattern of 3 distinct knocks, then 2, then 1. Each time, I pulled my pillow closer and grumbled into the darkness. I assumed it was the new tenant downstairs returning late, perhaps mistaking my door for their own. The noise was certainly annoying, an unwelcome interruption to my rest, but I considered it a simple misunderstanding, nothing more than a temporary inconvenience that would eventually resolve itself. The precise, unwavering regularity of the 3 o'clock knocking pattern started to become more than an annoyance. It began to grate on my nerves. Every night, the expectation of that distinct sequence of raps made my stomach clench. The initial assumption about a confused neighbor no longer felt right. The uncanny timing and identical rhythm felt too deliberate, too persistent to be a simple mistake. A building irritation, coupled with a powerful desire for undisturbed sleep, fueled a growing unease inside me. I wanted the disruptions to stop. I needed to know the source of these nightly intrusions. I decided to check the apartment building's hallway camera footage from the previous night, hoping to finally identify the person responsible for the insistent waking noise. I navigated the building's security system interface, calling up yesterday's feed from my floor. My fingers trembled slightly as I pinpointed the 3 o'clock mark. The screen showed the corridor outside my door, bathed in the camera's muted greenish light. I watched, my breath held tight in my chest, waiting for the late-night trespasser to appear. The minute hand ticked past 3 a.m., then another minute, then another. The hallway remained vacant. No person entered the frame. No shadow moved across the floor. No slight disturbance registered on the static image. The corridor was utterly, undeniably empty. Then, the audio kicked in. The precise, familiar sequence of 3 knocks, then 2, then 1, vibrated through the speakers. It sounded exactly as it had through my door. A cold dread seeped into my bones because there was nothing there to make the noise. The sound was perfectly captured, resonating clearly in the deserted space. My gaze darted back and forth across the screen, searching for any possible explanation, but there was none. And then, after the final rap, a soft, chilling sound followed. It was a whisper, a barely audible breath speaking my name, coming from the exact spot where the knocks had occurred, right outside my door. I sat motionless, staring at the screen, the sound of my name still resonating in my mind. My muscles would not obey me. A terrible understanding descended. Whatever had created those knocks, those infuriating rhythmic sounds, was not a visible entity. It was not a human being. It existed in a way that defied every logical explanation I possessed. The simple annoyance from the preceding week dissolved, replaced by an absolute terror. It had spoken my name. That quiet sound, uttered from an empty hallway, confirmed a personal awareness. This was not a random disturbance. This intrusion targeted me specifically. The knowledge of an invisible presence, intimately aware of me, filled me with an absolute vulnerability. The coming night stretched out before me, a vast, dark expanse without end. The certainty of another 3 o'clock rap, originating from nothing, now produced a persistent dread. There was no escape from this new, personal, supernatural threat. My life consisted of predictable days and interchangeable evenings. I worked in an office where numbers shifted across screens, my contribution unremarkable, just like the beige cubicle walls. No one remembered my name for long, and I rarely remembered theirs. My apartment served as a temporary holding cell, a place I merely occupied until the next rotation of mundane tasks. There were no hobbies, no passions, no strong opinions. I moved through the world, an observer of lives lived with more color and conviction. I rarely felt anything beyond a dull neutrality, persistent in its presence. Then came the house. It appeared on an online listing one idle afternoon, a stately presence among dozens of properties, some smaller, others newer. Its pictures showed a sprawling brick mansion, built when wealth was established quietly and lasted for generations, set back from a winding drive beneath ancient oaks. The price was low, almost absurd, a distressed sale from a long-forgotten estate. I did not possess the funds, nor the inclination for such an endeavor, yet I found myself arranging a viewing. The process was swift, almost automatic, and an invisible current pulled me along. There were few other bidders, a surprising lack of interest for a property of its scale. Within weeks, the paperwork was complete, and the keys felt heavy in my hand, now anchoring me to something I barely understood. The house itself was magnificent. High ceilings soared above dark wood floors. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dustless air. Ornate moldings curled along cornices, and grand fireplaces stood in every room, each a testament to meticulous craftsmanship. The extensive grounds held ancient trees and overgrown hedges, hinting at a forgotten design. This new home, with its history and undeniable presence, simply emphasized my lack. I walked its empty halls, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The vastness of the space magnified my isolation, a deep hollowness I had previously ignored in the quiet anonymity of my apartment. The house demanded a life, a purpose, a personality to match its grandeur, and I had none to offer. Its beauty starkly presented my own absence. The days began to blur, marked only by the shifting light in the tall windows. My routine involved exploring the vast rooms, measuring the silence with my footsteps. One afternoon, a pickup truck rumbled up the long drive. A man emerged, his face kind, framed by a broad-brimmed hat. He carried a pie, still warm. "Creed," he introduced himself, extending a hand. His grip was firm. "I live down the road, saw the lights on. Figured you might be settling in." His voice held a gentle drawl, a cadence I recognized from old films, but had never encountered in person. He spoke of the neighborhood, the changing seasons, and the importance of good drainage. He mentioned the kudzu, too. "It'll try to eat your house, given half a chance," he chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Grows a foot a day in summer. You gotta keep after it." I followed his gaze to the edges of the property. A vibrant green vine, thick and leafy, scaled ancient pines and spread across the ground, a relentless spread of vegetation. It seemed to possess a silent, vigorous life. Creed offered to help me learn the ropes of country living, a generosity that surprised me. He talked about fishing in the creek and the best spots for blackberries. His presence filled the vast space with a fleeting warmth, offering a temporary reprieve from the house's silent grandeur. I attempted to integrate myself into the nearby town. My new job involved data entry for a small accounting firm. The cubicle walls were a pale gray, equally uninspiring. My colleagues were polite, but conversations rarely moved beyond the weather or weekend plans. They spoke of local events, family gatherings, and community news, a network of shared experiences where I found no thread to grasp. I tried to ask questions, to show interest, but my efforts felt clumsy and forced. Their answers were brief, their smiles polite. Their easy camaraderie remained just out of reach. My attempts at social connection failed, each interaction reinforcing my isolation. The house became my refuge, its sprawling grounds, a landscape I began to know intimately. The kudzu, particularly, captured my attention. I watched its tendrils unfurl, reaching out from the woods, creeping across the stone wall, a living green blanket threatening to engulf everything in its path. I found myself spending hours walking the property line, observing its relentless advance. It felt like a quiet force. Its presence was a constant, a tangible thing I could focus on when the world outside felt distant and unapproachable. The house, with its mysterious history and the encroaching kudzu, began to exert a peculiar pull. They were both vast, silent, and demanded my attention, offering a strange comfort in their unwavering presence. I began to find myself drawn to the property, a focus I lacked elsewhere. I spent evenings researching the vine, learning about its history as an ornamental plant, then a fodder crop, and now an ecological menace. Its root systems could reach incredible depths, making eradication almost impossible. It had consumed abandoned homesteads, transforming structures into green mounds that blended back into the earth. The sheer scale of its growth impressed me. I felt a growing sense of responsibility for my own land, a small battle against a tireless green growth. My days became defined by the house and the encroaching kudzu, both vast, silent entities that filled the space where human connection failed. A month passed since I bought the house. My days settled into a quiet rhythm within its vast rooms. I continued my data entry job, the gray cubicle walls, a stark contrast to the sprawling green outside. My attempts at social connection remained fruitless, and the house became my world. Each evening, I walked the property, observing the kudzu's spread. It climbed trees, blanketed bushes, and threatened to consume everything. Its vibrant green asserted its dominance. I found a comfort in its persistent growth, a concrete reality. One night, the dream came. It began subtly, a darkness at the edges of my sleep. I stood in an overgrown part of the property, the kudzu higher than my head, forming dense tunnels. The air felt thick and still. Tendrils of the vine moved across the ground, climbing the trunks of unseen trees with speed. They writhed, slow and relentless, their broad leaves brushing something I did not see. Then a figure emerged from the kudzu's shadows. It was tall, indistinct, a shape from the deepening gloom. The figure lifted an arm, a long finger extended, pointing at a spot near my feet. The ground there appeared disturbed beneath the creeping vines. A voice, deep and resonant, reverberated through the dreamscape. It seemed to come from everywhere, a command pressing my mind. "Dig," the voice whispered. The word repeated, growing louder, more insistent. "Dig." The kudzu around the spot pulsated. I woke. My body ached with a dull soreness across my back and shoulders. My hands felt raw, the skin chafed. I pushed myself up, my muscles protested. The bedroom was dark, save for a sliver of moonlight through a tall window. My heart beat fast against my ribs in the quiet room. The dream lingered, its vivid details pressing against the edges of my waking mind. I still heard the voice, the single insistent word. A sharp sting in my palm drew my attention. I lifted my hand, seeing a fresh cut, a thin line of red against my skin. Dried mud clung to my fingernails deep beneath the beds, and an earthy smell clung to my skin. I stared at my hands, then at the cut on my palm. It was real. The dirt was real. The soreness in my body was real. The dream had been real. It had happened. The house had begun its influence. The old farmhouse sat quiet at the end of a long gravel driveway. Its weathered wood siding held patches of peeling white paint. Tall windows reflected the overcast autumn sky. Anna's hand, resting in mine, felt cold even inside the warm car. She had been quiet the whole drive, her usual easy laughter absent. As I pulled to a stop beside a dented pickup, she took a deep breath. "Just be polite, Joseph," she said. Her voice was small. "And try everything they offer." Her eyes, wide and nervous, met mine for only a moment. A tall woman with kind eyes and a welcoming smile opened the front door. This was Anna's mother, Margaret. She hugged Anna tightly, then turned her gaze on me. "Joseph, what a pleasure to finally meet you," she said. Her voice was soft, but her eyes held a sharp intensity as she looked me over. She took my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You have such a sturdy build, Joseph, and a truly vibrant complexion." The words felt like an appraisal. They held a calculating tone. Anna's father emerged from the living room. His name was Robert. He was a broad man with a thick beard and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Welcome, Joseph, welcome," he boomed. He clapped me on the shoulder. His hand lingered a moment too long. "A fine specimen, Margaret. A very fine specimen indeed." The dining room was large. A heavy wooden table, scarred and polished, dominated the space. It was laden with food. Steam rose from platters of turkey, mashed potatoes, and green bean casserole. The rest of the family sat around the table. Anna's Uncle Thomas, a gaunt man with bright, unblinking eyes, watched me from across the table. Her Aunt Carol, a stout woman, sat beside him. Her smile did not waver. Her gaze also held on me. Cousin Emily sat near Anna. She was a quiet girl about Anna's age. Emily offered a shy wave. Grandma sat at the head of the table. Silver hair framed her frail face. She offered a sweet smile, then her eyes too settled on me, a deep curiosity in them. We took our seats. Anna squeezed my knee under the table. She leaned close. "Just eat," she whispered, so low I barely heard her. Her words were a warning. The conversation flowed, easy and light on the surface. Questions about my job, my hobbies, my background. But the family's eyes, bright and attentive, never fully left me. Uncle Thomas leaned forward. "So, Joseph, tell us about your childhood. Were you always so robust?" He offered a wide grin. I felt a prickle of unease. My appetite, which had been eager moments before, now felt a little dulled. Anna kicked my shin. Her eyes pleaded with me to just answer, to just smile. I told them about growing up in the city, about summer camps, about learning to fish with my own father. Each detail seemed absorbed by them with an unnerving interest. Grandma then spoke. "You have such strong bones, Joseph. We can always tell." Her words were soft, yet they carried a strange weight. Anna's hand found mine onto the table. Her fingers gripped mine tightly, a small, desperate pressure there. The meal had barely begun, but a chill was settling over me, far colder than the autumn air outside. The taste of turkey and gravy, initially so rich, now felt heavy on my tongue. I glanced at Anna. She avoided my gaze, her face pale. She pushed food around on her plate. Her quiet pleas for me to eat more, delivered in whispers, mingled with the clatter of forks and the family's polite, watchful conversation. I knew then that this Thanksgiving was far from ordinary. The platters rotated around the table, never quite leaving my reach. Margaret's spoon dipped into the creamy mashed potatoes, adding another generous dollop to my already overflowing plate. "A newcomer must experience the full bounty, Joseph," she said, her eyes twinkling. "It is our family tradition." Robert added a thick slice of dark meat to my plate without asking. "You are still growing, son. You need the sustenance." My fork moved almost on its own. The turkey was moist and seasoned perfectly. The cranberry sauce burst with a sweet tang on my tongue. Every dish tasted impossibly good, a flavor deeper and more satisfying than any food I had ever known. My stomach groaned with fullness, but each bite compelled me to take another. Uncle Thomas leaned forward, his gaunt face intent. "Do not neglect the greens, Joseph. They are vital for strength." Aunt Carol pushed a casserole dish closer to me. "Our green bean casserole recipe has been passed down generations. You must try it all." Their gazes, unwavering and bright, settled on me as I ate. Anna sat beside me, her own plate barely touched, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She whispered, "Just eat it, Joseph. Please." Her plea was desperate. The food continued to arrive. My vision blurred slightly at the edges from the sheer quantity of food before me. My jaw ached from chewing. The main courses were cleared, and then Grandma presented a monstrous pumpkin pie. Its aroma filled the room. "And for dessert," she announced, her voice soft but firm. My stomach clenched. I shook my head, my throat tight. "Grandma, please. I could not eat another bite. A subtle change rippled through the family. Robert's smile stiffened. Uncle Thomas's bright eyes narrowed a fraction. Margaret's warm expression seemed to freeze. Anna grabbed my arm under the table. Her fingers dug in, her nails pricking my skin. "Joseph," she hissed, her voice low and fierce, "eat the pie." I looked at her, truly seeing the terror in her eyes. I picked up the fork. The pie slice was enormous. The first bite of pumpkin pie was sweet and rich, dissolving on my tongue. The sweetness was overwhelming. I swallowed it, feeling it sink into the already stretched space inside me. My stomach protested, a deep, churning ache beginning to build. I forced down another bite, then another. The nausea rose quickly, a hot, acrid wave. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. My shirt felt tight around my middle. I placed a hand on my abdomen. The fabric stretched taut. My stomach was distended, bulging outward with an unnatural firmness. It felt like a drum, full to bursting, not just with food but with something else, something hard and active within. The room started to spin. I knew I had to get out. Joseph's stomach heaved. I pushed away from the table, knocking my chair backward with a loud scrape that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet of the room. My hand went to my mouth, trying to stifle the urge to vomit. My vision swam. "I need to use the restroom," I choked out, not waiting for a response. I stumbled through the living room, past the watchful eyes, and down the short hallway. I found the door and burst inside, slamming the lock home with a desperate click. Cool tile met my bare hands as I leaned over the toilet, but nothing came up. My throat burned. My entire body trembled. I straightened up slowly, pushing myself away from the porcelain. The bathroom mirror reflected my pale, sweating face. Below my face, my shirt stretched unbelievably tight across my abdomen. I lifted the hem of my shirt. A gasp tore from my lungs. My stomach was a monstrous balloon distended far beyond any normal human capacity for food. The skin felt stretched to its limit, glistening and taut. But it was not just full. It rippled. A slow, steady undulation moved beneath the surface, a sickening organic churn. Something was growing inside me, pushing outward, living. The reality of it slammed into me, a cold wave of pure terror. This was not overeating. This was something else entirely. A soft knock came at the door. "Joseph, are you all right in there?" It was Anna's voice, hushed and urgent. I struggled to speak, my voice a broken croak. "Anna, my stomach, something is wrong." The doorknob rattled. She tried to open it. "Let me in, Joseph. Please." I fumbled with the lock, my fingers numb. The door swung open. Anna stepped inside, her eyes wide as she saw my exposed abdomen. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked at me, then her gaze dropped to my stomach, then back to my face, her expression a mix of anguish and resignation. "They fed you the blend," she whispered, her voice cracking. Her words held a terrible finality. I stared at her, not understanding. "The blend? What are you talking about?" She gripped my arm, her touch cold. "It's not just food, Joseph. It's a special mix. They've been preparing you." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back, a strange resolve hardening her face. "My family doesn't raise turkeys for Thanksgiving. They never have." My mind reeled. I looked at the horrifying swell of my stomach, the sickening movement within. "Then what? What is it?" I demanded, my own voice trembling. Anna looked down at the floor, then met my eyes, her own filled with a deep, crushing sorrow. "They find newcomers, healthy people. They feed them the blend to soften their tissues, to fatten them for carving." Her voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. "You were the newest one. The family chose you." A horrifying realization dawned on me, a truth far more grotesque than anything I could have imagined. "The turkey, on the counter," I stammered, remembering the glistening roasted bird. Anna nodded slowly, tears now streaming down her face. "That was last year's newcomer, Joseph. That was Uncle David." The image of the enormous, perfectly browned turkey, its skin crisp and inviting, flashed in my mind, now tainted with unspeakable horror. I felt bile rise in my throat again, but it was not just nausea from food. It was pure, absolute revulsion. The world tilted. My stomach continued its grotesque internal dance, a living, growing prison. I stumbled from the bathroom, my stomach a grotesque weight pulling me down, and Anna grabbed my hand. Her touch gave me a fragile hope. Her eyes were still red from tears, but a fierce determination burned within them. "The back door, Joseph," she hissed, pulling me towards the kitchen. The linoleum felt cold under my feet. My breath hitched in my chest. Each step sent a jolt of pain through my distended abdomen. We burst into the kitchen. Margaret stood in the archway to the dining room. Robert stood by the back door, blocking our exit. Uncle Thomas and Aunt Carol stood behind us, their expressions calm, almost serene. Grandma sat at the kitchen table, a small smile playing on her lips. They simply watched us, their faces devoid of anger, only a quiet certainty. Anna tightened her grip on my hand, then suddenly shoved me forward with all her might. "Go!" she screamed. She then spun around and lashed out at Margaret. She clawed at Margaret's face. Margaret cried out, a surprised yelp escaping her lips. The diversion was brief but effective. The family's attention snapped to Anna. Robert hesitated for a moment, his gaze flicking between Anna and me. I did not wait. I lurched past Robert, my body heavy and unwieldy. My stomach throbbed with a dull, relentless ache. My vision blurred. My legs felt like lead. The back door was a simple wooden panel painted white with a knob. I reached for it, my fingers fumbling. My entire body felt sluggish, as if moving through thick mud. The special blend had done its work. My muscles were weak. My tendons felt loose. A sharp, searing pain tore through my side. I cried out. I looked down, horrified, as a thin line appeared on the taut skin of my abdomen. The line widened. The skin began to split. A dark, glistening substance, thick and viscous, began to seep from the wound. My stomach lurched. The movement within me intensified, pushing against my stretched and now broken skin. It was trying to get out. It was alive. I reached the doorknob. My fingers closed around the cold metal. I twisted it with desperate strength. The door opened a crack. Fresh, cold air from outside rushed in, carrying the scent of damp earth and dying leaves. It promised freedom. I shoved against the door, trying to force my heavy body through the narrow gap. The pain in my stomach was excruciating. More skin tore. My abdomen was rupturing. A strong hand seized my shoulder. Robert's voice was calm, almost soothing. "Now, Joseph, we wouldn't want you to ruin the feast before it's ready." He pulled me back with surprising ease. My body offered little resistance. My muscles were too soft. My bones felt strangely pliable. Uncle Thomas and Aunt Carol came around me. They supported my arms. They guided me, not with force, but with an unsettling gentleness, back into the kitchen. My eyes fell on the kitchen counter. The enormous roasted shape was still there. It had been carved, revealing glistening white meat and dark, rich juices. But now, truly seeing it, the horror sank deeper into my soul. It was not a turkey. The shape was undeniably human. The faint outline of a skull, stripped clean, was visible in the hollow where the head should have been. The limbs were arranged like a fowl's, but they were not fowl limbs. They were human. This was Uncle David. This was the previous newcomer. They led me to the center of the kitchen. A large, rectangular wooden table stood there. It was surprisingly clean, prepared. Uncle Thomas and Robert lifted me onto the table. I landed with a soft thump. My body felt like a sack of jelly. The skin on my stomach continued to tear, a sickening squelch accompanying each rip. The living horror within me pulsed and pushed. I was already beginning to come apart. Margaret came forward. She held a large carving knife. The blade gleamed under the kitchen lights. Her eyes, usually kind, now held a focused intensity. She looked down at me, a pleased smile gracing her lips. "Welcome, Joseph," she said, her voice soft and melodious. "You are the feast." The knife descended. The ache in my chest had not lessened since Grandpa passed. Every evening felt colder, the house emptier without his booming laughter or the scent of his pipe tobacco. Tom, my little brother, would never know that warmth. He was only 2 when Grandpa left us, too young to remember the stories, the silly songs, or the way Grandpa could always make a cloudy day feel bright. I spent countless evenings telling Tom about him, trying to paint a picture of the man who meant the world to me. I wanted Tom to feel some connection, even if it was only through my words. Tonight, after reading his usual story, I tucked Tom into bed. His eyes, wide and innocent, looked up at me from beneath the covers. "Tell me about Grandpa again," he whispered, a request I never tired of hearing. I described Grandpa's garden, his favorite armchair, the way he always smelled of earth and something sweet. I talked about his kindness and his strong hands that could fix anything. Tom listened intently, occasionally nodding his head as if understanding every detail. Then, just as I was about to turn off his bedside lamp, Tom said, "Grandpa says Schlafgut, mein Schatzes, to me." My hand froze on the switch. I stared at Tom. That phrase, Schlafgut, mein Schatz. Grandpa had only ever said those words to me, every single night, from when I was a tiny child until I was old enough to insist I was too grown up for bedtime stories. It was our secret, a special blessing he'd whisper right into my ear. My parents, even my grandmother, never knew about it. It was ours alone. A shiver ran down my spine, not from cold, but from something else entirely. Hope. A desperate, unbelievable hope began to bloom in my heart. Tom could not have known those words. He simply could not. He looked at me, his face calm and certain. The room suddenly felt different, filled with the presence I had longed for with every fiber of my being. I found myself believing Tom. My grandpa was here. He had found a way to say goodnight. The revelation had settled deep inside me, changing everything. Tom had heard Grandpa, truly heard him, and relayed those secret words only Grandpa and I shared. The feeling of certainty grew with each passing moment, eclipsing the logical part of my mind that once might have scoffed at such a notion. There was no room for doubt now, only a burgeoning conviction that Grandpa was reaching out. I sat on the edge of Tom's bed, my hand resting gently on his small arm. I needed to understand more, to feel Grandpa's presence even stronger. "What else did Grandpa say, Tom?" I whispered, my voice filled with an eagerness that made my chest ache. Tom blinked slowly, his gaze still holding that distant, knowing quality. "He wants to talk to you," Tom announced simply, his tone matter-of-fact. "He says he misses you and wants to say goodbye properly." A wave of pure joy washed over me, so potent it stole my breath. The finality of Grandpa's death had always been a gaping wound. Now, a chance to ease that hurt presented itself. I could speak to him one last time. I could hear his voice, feel his love. Every fiber of my being resonated with absolute, overwhelming anticipation. A tiny whisper of skepticism vanished entirely, replaced by an ecstatic certainty that transcended reason. I was going to connect with Grandpa again. My joy was absolute, yet a small thought began to surface. Tom had never met Grandpa. He only heard my stories and saw pictures. How could he know Grandpa? The question demanded an answer. Tom, I asked, how do you know it's Grandpa? You never met him. Tom turned his head, his hand rising, and pointed to the old oak shelf where framed photographs sat gathering dust. He's right there, Tom said, his finger indicating a sepia-toned image. I picked up the frame Tom pointed to. It was an old, faded photograph of a man I did not recognize. He had a stern face, deep eyes, and a sharp jaw. His hair was slicked back and he wore a dark suit. This was not Grandpa. Grandpa's face was softer, his eyes kinder, his smile always ready. This man was a stranger. A cold, unsettling sensation crawled up my spine. The unsettling sensation intensified into rising panic. I gripped the frame and rushed from Tom's room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I found Dad in the living room, reading a newspaper. I shoved the picture into his hands. "Dad," I demanded, my voice sharp with a fear I did not understand. "Who is this man?" "Tom says this is Grandpa." Dad's face went ashen. His eyes, fixed on the man, widened with a terror I had never seen before. The newspaper slipped from his trembling fingers, falling to the floor with a soft rustle. He stared at the photograph, then at me, then back at the picture, a guttural sound escaping his throat. "That's not your Grandpa," he choked out, his voice a strained whisper, almost impossible to hear. "That man, he's not family. He was an associate, dangerous. I owed him a great debt. I thought the debt was long settled." The words hung in the air, thick with a horrifying implication. My mind reeled. The secret phrase, the direct communication, Tom's certainty. It was not Grandpa. A chilling, sickening realization struck me. The hope I cherished twisted into a grotesque, terrifying lie. My brother had been speaking to a stranger, a dangerous entity that had inserted itself into our lives under the guise of our beloved Grandpa. Immediate dread settled deep within my bones. I spun around and bolted back down the hallway, my legs pumping, my lungs burning. Tom's bedroom door stood open, revealing a section of the darkened room inside. I slammed it wide, my eyes scanning the bed. Tom was not there. He floated above the mattress, suspended a foot in the air. His small body hung perfectly upright, his arms dangling loosely at his sides. His head lolled to one shoulder, and his wide eyes stared directly ahead, fixed on a point beyond the far wall. The air in the room felt thick and cold around me. Then a deep, resonant sound rumbled from Tom's chest. A voice, much too low and powerful for a child, tore from his small mouth. It was a guttural sound, not my brother's, yet it filled the room from him. The words came clear, precise, and chilling. "Der Körper ist jetzt meiner." My legs locked beneath me. My brother's face, usually so soft and innocent, now held a terrifying stillness. It was not Tom. The figure of my brother hung in the air, a grotesque puppet, controlled by whatever spoke those horrifying words. My 500-word story assignment felt like an impossible task. My mind held no ideas for it. Miss Jones's voice droned on about ancient history, and her words did not reach me. A girl in the row ahead braided a section of her hair while looking out the window. Across the aisle, a boy sharpened his pencil, then dropped it into his open backpack. The scratching sound pulled my attention for a brief moment. The clock above the whiteboard ticked towards dismissal. I stared at the blank page in my notebook, trying to conjure a single original thought, but nothing formed. A small vent above the whiteboard clicked open, and a thick black fluid oozed from the opening. It dripped onto Miss Jones's head as she turned to write on the board, spreading quickly over her hair and face. Her skin began to melt where the substance touched, and she dropped the chalk onto the floor with a clatter. A gurgling sound came from her throat as she shrank, dissolving into the growing pool of blackness on the floor. The expanding, viscous puddle pulled her fully under in a few seconds, leaving nothing behind but a spreading stain. The entire event unfolded directly in front of my eyes and was a complete disruption. I had almost had an idea for my story just before that, and now my thoughts were scattered by the bizarre spectacle. I would have to start my brainstorming process again from the beginning. The black mass on the floor swelled, pushing its tendrils under the desks and across the classroom. A boy in the front row yelled when it touched his shoe, his foot beginning to melt into the dark liquid. Shouts erupted around the room as others saw the spreading horror and tried to scramble away. The fluid surged forward, engulfing rows of desks and their occupants in a wave of consuming darkness. A girl near the window shrieked as the substance climbed her leg, her skin dissolving into the thick blackness. The air filled with the wet sound of flesh dissolving and the sudden collapse of bodies into the ever-growing pool. I watched the grotesque scene, a thought about character development in chaos briefly forming in my mind, then fading as quickly as it had come. The viscous material covered the floor and climbed the walls, spreading over the whiteboard and dripping from the ceiling tiles. The black substance grew thick and syrupy, streaked with crimson and bits of clothing, covering every surface. The screams had mostly stopped, replaced by the sickening sounds of consumption and the occasional desperate gurgle. I tried to focus again on my assignment, thinking about a protagonist who struggles with a personal dilemma while an external disaster unfolds. The widespread destruction and the melting of my classmates was certainly a spectacle, but it added only more interference to my brainstorming process. My notebook lay open before me, its blank page still demanding a story, and I still did not have any ideas. The sounds of consumption stopped. The thick blackness covering everything began to recede slowly, draining into cracks in the floor and through the walls. I was alone in the classroom, which had been cleared of desks and chairs and every student. A thin film of dry blackness coated the space. I stood up carefully, my legs feeling stiff. The air tasted acrid. I walked towards the door, stepping over the dry, black residue. The hallway outside was desolate. I pushed open the heavy front doors of the school. The world beyond the school had been transformed. Buildings stood with melted walls, revealing their inner structures. The street was a cracked expanse, coated in dark residue. Cars sat twisted and hollow, fused to the pavement. A sense of irritation began to grow in me. This widespread destruction was just more distraction. My writing assignment still remained undone. The entire landscape now served as a massive backdrop, and it felt inconvenient. I looked at my notebook, still open to its blank page. The need to write a story pressed on me. I had spent so much time trying to find an idea. The struggle of not knowing what to write was a story in itself. That was it. That was the perfect story idea. The constant pressure, the endless search for inspiration, the blank page that needed words. I could write about the very act of not knowing what to write. This whole impossible situation, the melted world and my empty mind, had finally given me something. A small smile touched my lips. I began to write the first sentence. My 500-word story assignment felt like an impossible task. I opened the bar door. The scent of stale beer hit me. I scanned the faces, searching for people ready to snap. Russ sat at a table, a firefighter's emblem on his jacket, laughing with his friends. My eyes locked onto Todd. Todd stared back, his jaw tight, his hands flat on the table. I saw the anger in his gaze, a challenge I wanted to meet. I needed to see what he would do when pushed. My gaze moved from Todd to Russ. I began to set the night in motion. I knew what I needed to do. I caught Russ's eye across the room, holding his gaze until he looked away from his friends and toward me. I raised my hand in a subtle gesture, beckoning him closer. He walked over, his expression questioning, and I leaned in, my voice low but clear, telling him I had a place nearby where we could talk without interruption. I offered him room 21 at the motel down the street, suggesting he meet me there once the bar emptied out. He nodded, a slight smile playing on his lips, and then he returned to his friends. My attention shifted to Todd, who had been watching us. I pushed past a group of people, making my way directly towards him. I purposefully brushed his shoulder, a hard, deliberate contact. He flinched, turning his glare on me, his hands clenching into fists on the tabletop. I met his furious gaze, a slow smile spreading across my face, and I spoke loud enough for him to hear clearly above the bar noise. I told him if he wanted to finish what he started, he should come to room 222, the room right next to mine at the same motel, and I assured him no one would be there to stop us. He stood up, his chair scraping back, his face red with building rage. I watched him, satisfied, knowing my trap was set, and both men were moving exactly where I wanted them. I waited in room 2001, the room quiet around me. A knock came at the door, soft but firm, and I opened it. Russ stood there, a questioning look on his face, and he stepped inside when I gestured. He closed the door behind him and turned back to me, his gaze expectant. My eyes moved over his arms, appreciating the dark hair that grew thick on his skin, noticing the way it covered his forearms and wrists. "You have very rich body hair," I said, my voice even and calm. "I like the way it looks, the texture of it." He shifted his weight, a nervous smile touching his lips. "Thanks, I guess," he mumbled, his eyes darting around the room, trying to find a comfortable place for his gaze to land. I just watched him, saying nothing more about it for a moment, letting the quiet settle between us before I spoke again. "There is something else I wanted to show you," I said, taking a step towards the adjoining door that connected room 21 to room 22. He watched me without speaking, his head tilted slightly, an uneasy expression settling on his face. I put my hand on the doorknob and twisted it, pulling the door open and stepping through into the next room. Russ followed me slowly, his eyes wide and uncertain as he peered past my shoulder. Todd lay on the floor near the bed. His body was twisted at an unnatural angle, contorted in a way no living person could manage. His face was a mask of dark, bruised flesh, swollen and discolored. Blood matted his hair and covered the carpet around his head, staining the beige fibers a deep crimson. One arm was bent awkwardly beneath him, the other stretched out, fingers curled into a claw. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling, unseeing. Russ gasped, a choked sound leaving his throat, and he stumbled back against the doorframe, his face paling to an ashen color. He lifted a trembling hand to his mouth, his gaze fixed on Todd's still form, unable to tear away from the horror before him. I stood there, watching Russ's reaction, a cold satisfaction spreading through me, recognizing the absolute terror in his eyes. The hunt was over, and the prize was laid bare.